So when we're working on a story, whether that be a novel, a novella, or a short story, we want it to have some kind of heat. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tara East. I'm a lecturer in creative writing, I am a YouTuber, and I'm the author of the mystery novel Every Time He Dies. In today's video, I want to talk about the importance of heat when it comes to working on a story. So when we're working on a story, whether that be a novel, a novella, or a short story, we want it to have some kind of heat. What I mean by heat is that the work feels somehow alive. It has energy behind it. You're engaged with it and you're really excited to work on the piece. The piece is working and it feels as if it has something to it. Now, this is not to say that the story is perfect, not by a long stretch, but you can see the potential within the story. It is so much easier to work on a story when it has this kind of heat behind it. Now, this might sound really similar to inspiration, but I would argue that they're actually different. Inspiration is more about your emotional state. You're coming to the work and you're feeling almost alive with the story that you're wanting to write. Whereas heat is more external. It's the story itself is containing the energy, and you are recognizing or witnessing the energy that is already within that story, and that is what is making you engaged with it. There is something about the story. It's got a hook in it. It's sparked your curiosity, and now you're wanting to commit the time it's going to take to make that story the best that it could be, to fully discover the story, to shape it, to make it work, to make it publishable. So unfortunately, not every story, not every novel idea you come up with is going to contain this heat. At the start of this year, I came up with the completely arbitrary goal of writing and completing 2 short stories. I did not set the goal of having these 2 stories published because that's completely out of my control, but I wanted 2 polished, ready-to-go stories that I could then submit to the market. Now, the problem was I actually didn't have any ideas for short stories. So how I decided to fix this was by doing an exercise that I first came across from James Altucher, who is a productivity business blogger guy. The exercise is super simple. Every day you sit down and you try to come up with 10 ideas. And these can be 10 ideas for any given topic. The whole idea is that it's starting to train your brain to work a little differently, to see different possibilities and to make connections. So you could say, what are 10 things I'm going to cook for dinner tonight? What are 10 things I could do on the weekend? What's 10 ways I could save more money? That sort of thing. Now, obviously for myself, I was trying to solve a very particular problem. So I was trying to come up with 10 different story ideas every single day. After a week, I had a slew of new ideas, but of course, only a few of these actually caught my attention or sparked my intrigue. So I got to drafting. Once I started drafting and I was working on these short stories, a new problem became pretty obvious, and that was that these stories didn't contain any heat. They were very cool premises, they were very interesting situations, but they weren't actually stories yet, and they were missing vital parts. Now, because I am a writer and I am happiest when I'm writing, I stuck with the stories even though they weren't working. And basically, I was trying to figure the story out by actually writing the story. Now, here's the cool thing. While I was trying to make these stories work that just weren't working, I got an idea for a completely different story that kind of had no connections to anything that I had come up with. But the story idea came out of nowhere, and it had heat behind it. And within one single day, I had a solid draft completed. And part of the reason why the story had that heat is because it had something to it. It had something about it. It had that quality that is maybe a little bit unnameable. So what's my point with this video? So often I see writers, and particularly even amongst my students, they say that they can only write when they feel creative and when they feel inspired. And while creativity can work in that way, I would argue that it is good to keep up a regular creative writing practice so that when the muse does appear, they find you at your desk already working. I feel very strongly that sometimes we have to work for our stories. Stories don't always just pop into our heads, though that does happen. But how I was able to come across that particular story idea was by working, by doing my creative practice, by doing my writing practice, and sticking with stories even though they weren't working. Now, here's the thing. Those short story ideas that I came up with before are still fine, and I'll likely go back to them because a part of me wants to crack them. I want to figure out how to make these stories work because the premise is really cool and they still have potential even if they don't yet have any heat behind them. Now, this is all just part of being a writer. When you're a writer, you're showing up to your desk, you're engaging with your creative practice. And in doing so, you're more likely to come up with story ideas that contain that heat. At least more likely than if you just wait for inspiration to strike, and if you just wait for the ideas to come to you rather than chasing the ideas. Now, I've no doubt that a huge part of this is just our subconscious brain looking for connections and trying to solve problems and come up with new ideas. But again, that's just more evidence for why we should be regularly engaging with our creative practice. And as I shared in a previous video, there is so much reward around having a creative writing practice where you are practicing your writing rather than necessarily working on a specific story, just practicing your writing skills, your writing craft, and trying out new techniques and ideas. So that's all I have for you today. A small justification on why we should be engaging with our writing practice so that we can generate these story ideas that innately contain heat and that therefore make writing a little bit easier. And now I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about the idea of inspiration sort of being internally motivated versus the story itself containing the heat and inspiration, the thing that is engaging you? Do you find one easier to work with than the other? Do you feel inspired more often than you come up with story ideas that themselves are engaging? I'd love to know, so please leave a comment below. Now, if you'd like even more writing advice, you can of course check out the other videos on this channel, or you can go to taraeast.com and dive into the archives. While you're there, please consider joining my email newsletter. When you do, you'll receive an email in your inbox some Thursday mornings, and this will include a note by me, some resources that I've recently loved and think you will too, a quote of the week, and some other tidbits that I only share via email. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Now go do some writing because the world actually does need more books.